The story of the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders is one of the most chilling and heartbreaking crimes in American history. It began as a summer tradition, a place of friendship, nature, and youthful discovery. But on the morning of June 13, 1977, Camp Scott in Mayes County, Oklahoma, would be transformed forever from a beloved campsite into the site of a triple homicide so brutal that it would haunt the state and nation for decades. The victims, three young girls, Lori Lee Farmer, Michelle Heather Guse, and Doris Denise Milner, were just beginning their lives. Their murder sparked one of the largest manhunts in Oklahoma history, a trial that riveted the country, and a debate over justice that continues to this day. Camp Scott was a rustic, wooded Girl Scout camp operated by the Magic Empire Council of Girl Scouts since 1928. It had hosted generations of campers, offering activities such as hiking, fishing, canoeing, and exploring the outdoors. Located near Locust Grove, the camp had developed a reputation as a safe and enriching place for girls from the Tulsa metropolitan area and beyond. In 1977, it was gearing up for another summer session, unaware that tragedy loomed just beyond the tree line. The girls who would become victims were assigned to tent number 8 in the Kiowa unit, one of several clusters of tents throughout the camp. That tent was positioned at the far edge of the Kiowa unit, isolated from the others and somewhat obscured by forest growth. It had a reputation among older campers as the place where girls could get away with anything, given its distance from supervising staff. Originally intended to house 4 campers, a last-minute change left it with only 3: Lori Farmer, age 8, Michelle Guse, age 9, and Doris Milner, age 10. They met each other for the first time the night they arrived at camp. Lori Farmer was the youngest of the 3. She was brilliant, thoughtful, and mature for her age. Michelle Guse was curious and adventurous, with a bright demeanor that made her well-liked by peers. Doris Milner, who was attending camp with some initial hesitation, had recently gained confidence and was looking forward to the week ahead. Together, they represented the hope and innocence that Camp Scott was meant to nurture. What no one at Camp Scott knew was that the property had already been breached and violated before the girls arrived. Several weeks prior to the opening session, during an on-site counselor training event, one staff member returned to her cabin to find it had been ransacked. Her belongings were strewn across the floor. Someone had eaten her food and left behind a disturbing message. Inside a donut box was a handwritten note stating that 3 girls would be murdered. The note was seen by staff but dismissed as a prank. It was discarded and never reported to law enforcement. Around the same time, other counselors had noted items missing, and there were additional reports of vandalism. Tent flaps had been slashed. Still, these warnings were not taken seriously. June 12 marked the opening day of camp. Counselors conducted roll calls, organized belongings, and helped campers settle in. That night, they performed their standard checks to make sure all campers were in their assigned tents. As the sun set and the forest darkened, the 100 Girl Scouts settled in for their first night in the woods. The Kiowa unit was quiet, and the remote tent number 8 went dark. Sometime later that night, counselors on patrol noticed a dim light moving through the woods. It flickered and then disappeared. They assumed it was a prank by one of the girls and returned to their tent. Around 2 a.m., campers in various tents reported unusual events. One girl saw a man peering into her tent. Others heard footsteps or movement outside. Some listened to a girl screaming for her mother, "Mama, Mama," in the middle of the night. One camper became hysterical after thinking she saw a man in the woods. Despite these concerning incidents, the counselors reassured the girls, told them to go back to sleep, and returned to bed themselves. The following day, around 6 a.m., Carla Sue Wilhite, a camp counselor, set out to take an early shower. As she walked along the trail leading to the showers, she noticed something unusual beneath a large tree just off the path. From a distance, it looked like sleeping bags. As she moved closer, horror overtook her. Lying there was the lifeless, nude body of Doris Milner. Her hands were bound behind her back. Initially, Carla did not see the other 2 victims. Their bodies were still zipped inside their sleeping bags. Both girls were nude from the waist down. Law enforcement was called to the scene immediately. By 6:30 a.m., District Attorney Sidney Wise confirmed that all 3 girls had died from blunt trauma and strangulation. Each had a cord tied around her neck and had been gagged and bound with 2-inch wide black electrical tape. The girls had also been sexually assaulted. Their clothes were found near their bodies, discarded in the underbrush. The killer, or killers, had apparently carried the girls from their tent to the base of the tree where they were discovered, approximately 100 to 150 yards from tent number 8. Investigators scoured the scene. Near the bodies, they found a large roll of black duct tape and a red and white 9-volt flashlight with a makeshift lens cover that allowed only a narrow beam of light to shine through. At the tent, they discovered a bloody boot print made by waffle-type jungle boots. Another shoe print, from a tennis shoe, was found just outside the tent and appeared too large to belong to any of the victims. Large pools of blood stained the floor near where 2 of the girls had been sleeping. In an effort to preserve the integrity of the crime scene, the entire wooden platform of tent number 8 was removed by helicopter and flown to a state crime lab. Investigators also recovered fingerprints from the victims' bodies, although the prints were smeared and partial. Along a nearby trail, several pairs of eyeglasses and an eyeglass case were found. These belonged to other campers in the Kiowa unit and to a counselor, raising concerns that the perpetrator may have stolen items during or after the attack. Authorities acted swiftly. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation joined the case, along with local sheriff's deputies and troopers dispatched by Governor David Boren. Boren also requested the assistance of 3 trained bloodhounds from Pennsylvania. Nicknamed the Wonder Dogs by the press, the dogs were tasked with tracking the scent of the killer. Folklore quickly surrounded their efforts. A rumor spread that a Cherokee medicine man had placed a curse on the dogs, predicting their deaths. On June 18, one of the bloodhounds succumbed to heat prostration, adding to the mystique and unease surrounding the investigation. Attention soon turned to an area less than a mile west of Camp Scott, the 110-acre ranch of Jack Schroff. The bloodhounds had tracked the scent in that direction, and law enforcement descended on the property. There, they found items that seemed to match evidence from the crime scene, including a roll of duct tape and pieces of rope. Investigators also discovered several tools, including a tire iron and crowbar, although these were not definitively linked to the murders. A single footprint found on the property matched the waffle boot print discovered in tent number 8. Schroff was cooperative and submitted to a polygraph test, which he passed. Despite the accumulation of evidence, investigators were unable to identify a suspect with certainty. Numerous people were brought in for questioning and subjected to lie detector tests, including Camp Ranger Ben Woodward. All passed, pressure mounted for an arrest, and public fear escalated. Then, on June 24, just 11 days after the murders, law enforcement named a suspect. Gene Leroy Hart, a convicted rapist and fugitive from justice, was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Hart had grown up in Locust Grove and was well known to local law enforcement. In 1966, he had been convicted of 2 brutal rapes involving pregnant women and sentenced to more than 300 years in prison for rape, kidnapping, and burglary. In 1973, he escaped from the Mays County Jail with 2 other inmates. The others were recaptured quickly. Hart vanished. Despite his violent criminal record and fugitive status, there had been little effort to locate him over the following years. Many in the community, particularly within the Cherokee Nation to which Hart belonged, believed he had been unfairly targeted by law enforcement. Supporters claimed he was a scapegoat, chosen more for his criminal history and racial background than any definitive evidence linking him to the crime. That same day, June 24, a man resembling Hart was reportedly seen running from a cave in the area near Camp Scott. He was believed to be armed with a 20-gauge shotgun and a .22 caliber rifle allegedly stolen from the Schroff property. A massive search was launched. Approximately 200 law enforcement officers and 400 volunteers swarmed a 4-mile area around the camp. The volunteers, though asked not to bring weapons, were often armed regardless. Some were arrested for public intoxication or marijuana possession. Members of the American Indian movement arrived on the scene to monitor what they feared would become a racially charged search. The cave itself was of great interest to authorities. Lawmen who searched it noted something unusual. In the surrounding woods, they were swarmed with ticks, but inside the cave, no ticks were found. This led to speculation that Hart, who was of Cherokee descent, had used traditional medicine to protect himself from insects. On one of the cave's walls, a message had been scrawled in crude writing. It claimed that the writer had been living there since the murders and called the investigators fools. Weeks later, on July 29, a private security guard monitoring the now abandoned Camp Scott reported seeing movement in the woods. When he returned to the director's residence, he found a bag containing Doris Milner's shoes and socks, which were still wet. How they arrived at that location and why they had not been seen earlier remains unexplained. The discovery of Doris Milner's wet shoes and socks in a bag on the steps of the camp director's residence reignited concerns about how deeply the killer may have infiltrated Camp Scott. It was a disturbing indication that the person responsible was still nearby, possibly watching or toying with those investigating the case. The presence of the items also suggested either a long-standing familiarity with the terrain or the audacity to return to the scene of the crime weeks later. Investigators interpreted this as further evidence that Gene Leroy Hart, who had grown up in the area and had an intimate understanding of the nearby terrain, could very well be responsible. Despite the growing pile of circumstantial evidence, law enforcement had yet to locate Hart. He had been living as a fugitive since 1973 when he and two other inmates sawed their way out of the Mays County Jail. While the other escapees were quickly apprehended, Hart vanished into the remote wooded areas of eastern Oklahoma. Many believed he had been aided by local supporters, some of whom thought he was unfairly targeted. His status as a Cherokee man in an overwhelmingly white, rural county added a layer of racial tension to the case. Some in the Native American community felt he was being used as a scapegoat, and others, including members of his own family, insisted he was innocent. After a year of searching and investigation, law enforcement finally received a tip that led them to Cherokee County, about 45 miles from Camp Scott. On April 6, 1978, a team of Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation agents, including Mike Wilkerson, Harvey Pratt, Jack Lay, Larry Bowles, Bud Owsley, Kerry Thurman, Don Sharp, and Roger Crisco, descended on a home deep in the wooded outskirts near Bunch, Oklahoma. The house belonged to a man named Sam Pigeon. Agents entered and found Hart inside. He was taken into custody without resistance and transported immediately to the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister. At the time of his arrest, Hart had already been convicted of 2 brutal rapes, 2 kidnappings, and 2 burglaries. His sentence amounted to over 300 years. He had only served 3 years of that term before escaping in 1973. While on the run, he had lived quietly in the area, reportedly with help from sympathizers. Hart's arrest was a breakthrough in the Girl Scout case, though the physical evidence tying him to the murders remained largely circumstantial. Still, authorities charged him with 3 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Lori Farmer, Michelle Guse, and Doris Milner. The trial took place in March 1979, nearly 2 years after the murders. It was one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in Oklahoma history. Public opinion was sharply divided. Some believed Hart was guilty beyond any doubt. Others argued that law enforcement had built a flimsy case around a man who had already been demonized for past crimes. The prosecution relied on the items found near the bodies and in the surrounding woods: duct tape, rope, the flashlight, and the shoe print. They also introduced the handwritten note found in the cave, which appeared to taunt the investigators and implied a connection to the murders. Additionally, they emphasized Hart's history of violence against women and his escape from jail as evidence of his capacity for such a crime. The defense focused on the lack of direct evidence. No one had seen Hart at the camp. None of the fingerprints recovered matched his. There were no apparent eyewitness accounts placing him near tent number 8 on the night of the murders. The evidence from the cave was questioned due to contamination concerns. Defense attorneys also accused investigators of bias and suggested that they had built a case around Hart due to his prior record and his status as a fugitive. The defense further criticized the state's handling of the original threatening note found weeks before the murders and the general lack of security at Camp Scott, arguing that other suspects were not adequately investigated. Despite the prosecution's passionate case and the sheriff's declaration that he was 1,000% sure Hart was guilty, the jury found him not guilty. The verdict stunned the public and deeply divided the community. While Hart was acquitted of the murders, he remained incarcerated due to his prior convictions. He returned to the Oklahoma State Penitentiary to serve out the remainder of his sentence. 305 years of the original 308 remained. Just a few months after the trial, on June 4, 1979, Hart collapsed and died while jogging and lifting weights in the prison yard. He was 35 years old. An autopsy confirmed that he had died of a heart attack. His sudden death sparked renewed debate. Some viewed it as a form of karmic justice. Others saw it as the tragic end of a man they believed had been wrongly accused. With Hart dead and no other suspect identified, the Girl Scout murders case fell into legal limbo. Technically, the case was still open, but there were no active leads. Law enforcement did not name any new suspects, and Camp Scott closed permanently the day the bodies were found, never reopened. The property, once a place of joy and tradition, became synonymous with terror and grief. In the years that followed, the families of the victims sought justice in civil court. They filed a lawsuit against the Magic Empire Council of Girl Scouts, alleging gross negligence in the operation and security of the camp. The plaintiffs argued that the camp had failed to take seriously the warning signs leading up to the murders, including the threatening note, previous burglaries, and slashed tent flaps. The defense maintained that the murders were unforeseeable and that all reasonable precautions had been taken. In 1985, after a lengthy legal process, the families lost the civil case. No damages were awarded. Despite the legal setbacks, the families did not stop fighting. They became vocal advocates for crime victims' rights. Their efforts contributed to the development of the Oklahoma Crime Victims Compensation Board and the passage of the Oklahoma Victims' Bill of Rights. These legislative changes improved how the state supported the families of murder victims, offered financial assistance, and ensured a stronger voice for victims in the judicial system. Meanwhile, advances in forensic science brought new hope. In 1989, early DNA testing techniques were applied to the evidence collected in 1977. At the time, the samples yielded inconclusive results. The technology was still developing, and the evidence had degraded over time. Nevertheless, the potential for DNA to break the case wide open remained. In 2008, another round of DNA testing was conducted. Again, the results were inconclusive. The materials had continued to degrade, and the partial profiles did not produce a conclusive match. Still, investigators did not give up. They maintained a chain of custody and continued preserving any remaining physical evidence in hopes that future technology would finally produce answers. That future came in 2022. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation used the most advanced DNA testing methods available to re-examine the materials. Although the exact nature of the samples tested has not been publicly disclosed, the OSBI announced that they had obtained a partial DNA profile that strongly suggested Gene Leroy Hart's involvement in the murders. While the sample did not allow for 100% identification due to the limited and degraded nature of the evidence, it was described as consistent with Hart and not with any other individuals tested. The OSBI declared the case resolved to the best of modern science's ability. Despite the scientific breakthrough, the case remains legally unsolved. Hart had been acquitted in a court of law, and under the principle of double jeopardy, he could not be retried. The case is listed as inactive but open. It exists in a legal purgatory, officially unresolved but unofficially settled in the minds of many. In February 2025, nearly 48 years after the murders, Gary Pitchlynn, one of Hart's original defense attorneys, released a book titled The Usual Suspect. The book explored the trial in depth and offered a critique of the investigation, highlighting what the author believed to be misconduct by law enforcement and systemic bias. Pitchlynn argued that Hart was a convenient target and that law enforcement had failed to investigate other leads due to tunnel vision and a desire for a quick resolution. The publication renewed debate and drew national media attention back to the case. The story of the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders has become part of the broader cultural memory. It is retold in true crime documentaries, books, and podcasts. One of the most well-known retellings is the 2022 Hulu docuseries Keeper of the Ashes, The Oklahoma Girl Scout Murders, hosted by actress Kristen Chenoweth. She revealed that she had been scheduled to attend Camp Scott that very week but stayed home due to illness. Her connection added a haunting weight to the narrative and brought renewed public awareness to the case. Over the years, many questions have persisted. Could the camp have done more to protect the girls? Was the threatening note a genuine warning? Did Hart act alone, or was someone else involved? Could the killer have still been watching the camp in the days and weeks that followed? And why, despite all the clues and evidence, did it take nearly half a century for DNA to provide what seemed like the final answer? Today, the land that once held Camp Scott sits unused. Nature has reclaimed much of the terrain. The tents, cabins, and trails have been weathered by time and decay. No new campers have walked those paths since that dark morning in 1977. Yet the memory of Lori Farmer, Michelle Guse, and Doris Milner endures in the hearts of their families, in the records of law enforcement, and in the minds of a public that still seeks justice. The Oklahoma Girl Scout murders remain one of the most devastating and unresolved crimes in the nation's history. While the passage of time may have dulled the headlines, it has not dulled the pain. Nor has it dimmed the hope that truth, if not legal justice, has finally emerged from the shadows.